A terrifying break-in results in multiple victims.
I swung the door open and found her laying there.
She was shot in the upper part of the leg.
Once we had called the room clear, we found a deceased individual.
Despite first impressions, the evidence suggests this isn't quite what it seems.
Things that were present at the scene weren't adding up to a home invasion.
We found a bunch of torn up pictures. There was some kind of lost love, heartache there.
Stand in my shoes here for a second. How's that look on you?
Bad.
As the investigation unfolds, detectives realize their murder victim might have put his trust in the wrong person.
She had created a fraudulent email address so that she could steal money from him.
And there could be more than one victim.
You now have two separate individuals that died under suspicious causes, both tied to the same female.
It was just amazing how far that she had got in this fantasy world that she was living in.
She was going to be exposed as being a fraud, and she couldn't have that happen.
At 1:26 p.m. on August 10th, 2023, police in Zanesville, Ohio receive an emergency call from a woman named Deborah-Frazier.
911, where's emergency? I think someone's in the apartment. It was unlocked, and there's stuff everywhere, and I can't find my boyfriend. And okay, ma'am, I'm going to stay on the phone with you, but I need you to back out of that apartment right now. I see someone. Oh, my God. Oh, my God, I'm shot. Oh, unit, I have an active home invasion.
As I was en route, they did give out additional information of two men.
They were wearing hoodies and masks. One had gloves, she said.
Within minutes, police arrive at Deborah's address.
I started scanning the area. Every car that I was passing, didn't see anybody matching that description leaving the area.
I began knocking on the door. Once I did, I heard a female moaning, and I continued pounding on the door, identifying myself as the police. I heard her voice say she was not able to open the door. I checked it. It was unlocked, so I swung the door open. And then I found her laying there.
She was holding her left leg. It was apparent she had a bullet hole through her jeans.
She was shot in the upper part of the leg, thigh area. You know, you get shot in the right place, you could bleed to death. So we're tending to her.
I saw a revolver laying on the floor a few feet away from her. What I assumed was the assailant's firearm or hers, but we knew she wasn't a threat.
At that point, other officers were on scene and paramedics had showed up. She was placed on the gurney, moved to the hospital as quick as we can.
Police quickly search the two-bedroom apartment to make sure the assailants are gone.
When we got to the back bedroom, it was dark. As I entered, I saw the closet. One of the closet doors was open. A lot of people hide in closets and showers over my career, so I kind of put my attention on that. I noticed a form laying on the floor. It looked like a human under blankets. Pulled the blankets back, and at that time we found a deceased individual.
He was wrapped in black trash bags, black duct tape, a blanket, and there was some blood on the carpet.
Officers' immediate priorities are to secure the crime scene and assist their surviving victim.
I was coming down the hallway, and the paramedics were still attending to Deborah on the floor. Our Detective Bureau Sergeant Phil Michael was there, and one of our evidence technicians, Detective Moore. I said, hey, we have a dead body in the bedroom. Deborah, she overheard that and asked, who's back there?
We weren't going to volunteer any information that witnesses might not know. We want to hear what their story is first.
They loaded her up on a gurney, and at this point, I'm still trying to collect information. I asked her if she lives there with anybody, and she advised that she does. Her boyfriend, Tom, she was frantic. She had a gunshot wound to her leg. So getting a whole lot of information out of her, it was hard to do, but I was able to get enough to know that Tom lived there, and she hadn't been there in a couple of days.
And we learned Deborah, she was 35, Tom was in his mid-60s. There was quite a considerable age gap between the two.
As Deborah is rushed to the hospital, investigators examine the deceased victim on scene. A few feet from the body, they find a wallet with an ID for 66-year-old Thomas Waddell.
Looking at his BMV picture, it was easy to identify him as being the deceased.
It's just gone from a home invasion robbery to, now somebody's wrapped up in a blanket. There's going to be a lot more things that are going to need to be done that we need to check out and investigate.
Thomas Wayne Waddell was born July 20th, 1957, and grew up in the greater Cincinnati area.
He had one sister, two loving parents. Him and his sister were very close. They were like best friends.
His parents were religious, Nazarene church, I believe, so he was always in church, close with his family.
He liked to sing, he loved music, he loved woodworking and working with his hands. He's very creative.
Tom graduated from Western Hills High School in 1975. 3 years later, he married his high school sweetheart and started a family of his own. To support them, he began working as a retail manager.
He built stores for Walmart. He did a lot of third shift, so like when he was home, he was sleeping or he was hanging out with us.
My dad was a really good father. Going fishing, going camping, working in the wood shop with him. He just liked to have a good time with his family.
Being a father came naturally to Tom, but being a husband did not, resulting in the first of multiple divorces.
But he did not like to be by himself. He was married 5 times.
I do not know why my dad's marriages fell apart. I feel like he was looking for something, whether it was with this woman or the next woman.
In 2015, after his children had grown up and started their own families, Tom moved to the town of Zanesville for a fresh start.
He was a manager at Kroger, and everyone respected him and did what he asked of them and had no problems. He made friends easily. He also liked to rescue dogs. At one point in time, he had 12 dogs that he rescued from shelters. I mean, Dad would take his shirt off his back to go help someone. That's how he ended up meeting Deborah-Frazier.
They met at work. She's obviously significantly younger than him. She would have been an associate. He was a manager.
Miss Frazier was born and raised in Zanesville. She worked various jobs as a clerk or as a bagger.
Tom found himself drawn to his reserved 33-year-old coworker.
Deborah-Frazier was intriguing. She didn't have a big support group, and she kind of put herself on an island. There were only a couple people that she was close with.
At first, Tom was only trying to help Deborah, who was struggling financially.
I think he just was trying to help her, and then he built that relationship and that bond with her, and that's how the relationship started.
They had a relationship. It was not continuous because she'd moved away to Florida for a period of time.
By the summer of 2023, the couple had moved in together. Tom retired from his job at the grocery store and seemed to have finally found the right woman.
If you look in the apartment, there's pictures of them together. They had a cookbook which said, you know, Tom and Debbie's cookbook. So it was clear they were in a relationship.
But now, their lives have been torn apart. In the aftermath of an apparent break-in, Tom is dead, and Debbie is being rushed to the hospital with a gunshot wound. But a closer look at Tom's body brings the timeline of events into question.
I could recognize from my experience that this individual had been deceased longer than the duration of this call.
It was an active, ongoing home invasion and her being shot. It seemed unlikely that they would have taken the time to try to wrap a body up. Now, stuffing it in a closet, pushing it under a bed, maybe, but to wrap it up in plastic bags and then hide it in a closet, those things were not adding up.
The way things are starting to unfold, obviously we're going to have more questions.
Coming up, Deborah relives the attack.
I was so scared. The one assailant pulled out a gun.
And their victim provides crucial evidence to help identify his killer.
There was a hair found between his fingers, long and dark.
Police in Zanesville, Ohio, are investigating the death of Tom Waddell, a retail store manager whose girlfriend Deborah-Frazier was also shot. The first piece of evidence is a gun found at the scene.
The gun we found when Deborah was moved was a .22 caliber revolver, an older model. It was fully loaded with 9 rounds, 2 of which had been spent.
But there is little else to suggest this was a robbery.
There was still money in drawers. There were valuable guns all over the place.
I found a TV in the back bedroom just leaning against the wall that was still connected to a DVD player. When it was laying on the floor, I was able to develop 10 latent lifts on that TV and send them to BCI for an examination.
A lot of times when you have home invasions, they look completely wrecked. Mr. Waddell's apartment was pretty well kept. The couch cushions weren't pulled up and thrown everywhere like people were looking for something particular. It was just kind of like things were pushed around, disheveled, and then there were some torn shreds of photos, actually of Mr. Waddell and Ms. Frazier, which seemed odd for a home invader.
Further inspection of the crime scene raises more red flags.
In one of the bottom kitchen cabinets, I found an open box of trash bags. They have blue, like, plastic straps on them, and those is the same kind that was on Thomas Waddell's body.
We found black duct tape that was a couple cabinets over from where the trash bags were found.
That also didn't make sense because someone who's ransacking an apartment or wrapping up a body is not going to return the tape to the cabinet where it came from.
I just had that feeling that, you know, this was staged.
Hoping to reconcile the discrepancies, investigators stop by Deborah's hospital room to speak with her before she's taken in for surgery.
Today I came back after being gone for like a couple days. I was visiting a friend, and then when I came back, I noticed the door was unlocked. I went in because I didn't know if Tom maybe just forgot to lock the door or whatever. I've been texting and calling, and there was no response. And then I saw things were messed up, and that's what I decided to call 911.
Okay. And tell me about you getting shot.
Well, I saw them, and they...
Saw who?
The assailants, to yahoos, such, you know.
She said the first guy was wearing gloves, a hoodie, and a ski mask, but she could make out that he was a white guy. The second guy she couldn't give a very good description of.
It was kind of like a little bit of a scuffle, so I tried to grab the gun.
By the barrel?
I think so, because when he aimed, I was just trying to grab it so it wouldn't, if it went off, it wouldn't be in my direction, but I'm not that strong, so he ended up firing into my leg.
Okay.
With doctors ready to prepare Deborah for surgery, detectives wrap up their interview and collect Deborah's phone and bloody clothing into evidence. After leaving the hospital, they canvass Tom and Deborah's neighborhood looking for potential witnesses.
That apartment complex is pretty nice, well-maintained, and is on a part of the city that we don't have a lot of crime.
No one reported hearing a gunshot, no one heard any type of struggles, no one saw anybody running.
There are some ring cameras that are accessible. They see nothing on those.
So the story that she's told us, the statements we've got from witnesses, it's not adding up to be the home invasion robbery, minus the commotion on the 911 call of two people that would have allegedly just murdered someone and then shot someone else that make absolutely no sound at all. So we're going to want to continue to look further.
The following morning, the medical examiner conducts an autopsy on Tom Waddell. Detectives hope it will provide some much-needed answers.
It's not until they get to the autopsy that they realize how well wrapped up this body is. It's wrapped in plastic and then plastic bags and then a comforter.
It's not something that you could do rather quickly. I mean, you know, it's going to take time to get him under those many layers.
We want to deal with each layer that he's wrapped in separately, looking for evidence and trying to figure out what is going on in this case.
There was a hair found in Tom's left hand between his fingers that was long and dark.
That is completely different than his hair, so that was put and packaged so that the laboratory can look at it. And he has a blue strap wound.
The morning after 66-year-old Tom Waddell was found dead in his apartment, the medical examiner in Licking County, Ohio, has discovered how he was killed.
It was determined that he had died from a single gunshot to the back of the head, a .22 long rifle round.
The bullet matches the same caliber that was removed from Deborah-Frazier's leg, which matches the gun that was found at the scene.
Most importantly, the medical examiner is able to determine how long ago Tom was murdered.
There is a series of steps that the muscles go through in rigor mortis. This gentleman had the stage where his rigor is waning away. So that, to me, meant that he had been dead approximately 24 to 36 hours prior to when I'm looking at him.
Sometime between 8 p.m. on August 9th and 2 a.m. on August 10th, approximately 12 to 16 hours prior to us getting the call.
At that point, that didn't make sense based on the timeline. Why would you kill somebody, go to the extent of taking your time to wrap them up, put them in a closet, and then come back a whole day later? That didn't make a whole lot of sense. Why wouldn't you just do it right now and distance yourself from the scene?
The evidence suggests Deborah might not be telling the truth about what happened.
It's starting to look like she might have a hand in it. We don't know exactly yet, but her story isn't adding up. We're going to want to continue to look further, try to find any type of motive that she might have, so we would obtain a search warrant for her phone.
We found in her wallet a card, and it had writing on it, and it was, I believe, a 6-digit code. And Sergeant Michael, who conducts the data extractions, he entered the PIN code, and it unlocked the phone.
They find a question that was put into her phone, being researched on the internet.
It was 8:16 a.m. on the morning of the 10th. How long does GSR stay on the skin?
When you talk about GSR, you're talking about gunshot residue. That was definitely an indicator to me that she had more involvement than what she was saying. Now, whether she was the actual person who shot him at that point, we didn't know, but she definitely, in my mind, had some involvement in this homicide.
That afternoon, once her wounds have been stabilized, detectives ask Deborah to repeat her version of events.
Deborah tells us that she had gone to hang out with her friend, John Anderson.
We drove around for a while, and then I ended up asking him if I could just spend the night. We played video games, we watched TV. He's an old friend from my early college years.
She told us the next day, after staying with Mr. Anderson, she returns to her residence, and it's at that point in time that she finds Tom, and this whole home invasion occurs.
When was the last time you ever fired a gun?
Last time I ever fired a gun? When I was wrestling, trying to get the gun pointed away from me, I had a hold of it when it went off.
Well, what do you think happened to Tom?
I honestly don't know. I even tried calling today.
Well, Tom was shot and killed. It's all right, you can take a minute.
In my opinion, it sounded like she was fake crying. It didn't seem real at all.
Why are you searching? How long does gunshot residue stay on my hands? Yesterday morning at 8 in the morning. Listen, you did.
I didn't.
And I'm gonna ask you to be 100% honest with me. Did you have something to do with his death?
No.
And I'm gonna be as straight as possible. I've probably been a cop now for about 20 years. This isn't the first murder investigation that I've ever handled. It's not gonna be the last. There was no home invasion robbery, okay? There was absolutely none. So, you've already locked yourself into the biggest lie. Here's your chance to unwind it and tell the truth. We know that you were involved. You shot him with the .22.
I didn't.
Yes, you did, right in the top of the head. Come
I
on.
didn't do it.
You can't even explain why you have those search history in your phone. Stand in my shoes here for a second. How's that look on you?
Bad.
Backed into a corner, Deborah still maintains her innocence. When pressed for more information about John Anderson, the man she'd stayed with the night before finding Tom's body, she insists he's just a friend. But detectives wonder if something more was going on, and if it led to Tom's murder.
We need to go get John right away before he gets and talks to her. So if he is involved, that, their stories don't change.
Coming up, detectives interview Deborah's other boyfriend.
Did you guys sleep in the same room? We did.
And another mysterious death is revealed.
You now have two separate individuals that died under suspicious causes.
A day after Tom Waddell was found murdered, detectives visit John Anderson in Zanesville, Ohio, to ask about his relationship with suspect Deborah-Frazier.
At the time that that interview was happening, there's still open questions. And among those open questions is she the trigger man? Is she not? Is she just involved? Is there another person?
He's her alibi. He definitely could be an accomplice.
So the reason I want to talk to you is in reference to Deborah. Start from when you know, I guess how you know her, how long you've known her and stuff like that.
She and I met in late 2012. She and I were in a relationship for about 10 years or more.
Okay. Did you guys break up then, I think it?
No.
Oh, are you currently still boyfriend and girlfriend?
Technically, yes.
John confirms he received a call from Deborah on August 9th.
John told us that Deborah was very panicked. She was stressed, and he just wanted to help her in any way that he could. But he did that by being there for her and driving her around all night.
He drove her up to Dresden, which is a town about 10 minutes north of Zanesville.
What made you decide to drive to Dresden? Did she request that?
She did. I thought she wanted to get out of the house.
What happened after that?
She and I drove back to Oakland, and we just went to sleep. We went to bed.
Did you guys sleep in the same room?
We did.
He told us he dropped her off the next morning at her apartment. He couldn't remember an exact time.
We asked him if he knows who Tom was. He had no clue. So we laid it out to Johnny that, you know, Deborah and Tom were in a relationship, and he just seemed floored. He just couldn't believe what was being told to him.
His understanding from Ms. Frazier was that she was working as a home health care live-in for Mr. Waddell because he had dementia. And so he is very, very shocked by all this.
And you've never been in her apartment at all?
Never.
So, and the only reason I ask you that, and I don't have a reason to doubt you at any point right now, is because we collected some biological evidence that's going to have some DNA on it. Would your DNA be found in that apartment on any type of weapon or any type of duct tape or trash bags or anything like that?
No.
Anderson gives them permission to search his cell phone, and they are able to use the geolocation services to essentially track and verify everything that he says.
There was no evidence in the apartment that had anything to do with him, and it truly seemed like he had nothing to do with the offense other than being manipulated and lied to by Deborah-Frazier.
With John's statement, investigators have enough circumstantial evidence to get warrants for Deborah and Tom's digital records.
There were more than 20 warrants that were issued to collect information on emails, phone records, location services, financial records.
We get the bank records, and there was some pretty large monetary withdrawals from the bank. And Mr. Waddell, being a retiree on a fixed income, those type of expenditures, not consistent generally with a person who's on a fixed income.
Deborah's phone contains evidence she may have been behind the withdrawals.
We were able to see that she had created a PNC fraudulent claims at gmail.com email address, where she was fabricating emails, we believe, to show Tom so that she could steal money from him.
The emails stopped, strangely enough, on the 9th. There's nothing after that to Mr. Waddell about fraud. And it really starts to add up as to, okay, what was the motive behind Ms. Frazier killing Mr. Waddell?
Investigators request a full extraction of Deborah's account from her provider, including any deleted data. They also return to the scene of the crime to search for any evidence that might have been overlooked.
Thomas Waddell had been shot in the back of the head. We just didn't know where.
Just inside the front door, right beside where Deborah-Frazier was laying when we found her, was a recliner. The recliner that was facing the TV there in the living room had a blanket folded over the top of the headrest. And when we moved the blanket, we found a blood stain.
Looking how tall Tom was, where his actual gunshot wound was at on the top of his head, that suggests that Tom was sitting in his recliner when he was shot.
One mystery has been solved, but the discovery creates a new one.
Tom was a big guy, and Deborah's not big, and so even moving his body from the recliner and into the bedroom was going to be a very significant task for Deborah.
We believe she had some help getting him there.
Detectives determined Deborah's boyfriend, John Anderson, was not involved. But lab results provide another potential accomplice.
The prints from the television come back, and they come back to a guy from Florida named David Grantham.
This particular individual had some petty theft crimes and some receiving stolen property crimes, so it's not a far leap.
This was a lead that we were going to have to track down.
Days into their investigation of Tom Waddell's murder, detectives have a new suspect, Florida resident David Grantham.
We're looking to see whether or not Mr. Grantham had a good alibi, and in this case, he had a rock-solid alibi, and that was that he was in fact dead.
According to Florida records, David Grantham died in February 2021, 2.5 years ago.
He died of a drug overdose that was called in by his roommate at the time.
And when detectives learn that roommate's name, it's one they recognize.
I called down to Tavares. I had their police department forward the information, and when they sent me the investigation, I found that Deborah-Frazier was the person that called 911.
She had recently moved back from Florida to Ohio, which would explain why Grantham's fingerprints were still on the TV.
You now have two separate individuals that died under suspicious causes at this point that are both tied to the same female.
It all seemed a little odd. When reading the reports, it didn't seem that they thought there was any type of foul play.
Is there any evidence of foul play in Mr. Grantham's death? No. Does this coincidence make it go from not suspicious death to, well, maybe something might have happened? Maybe, but in the world of prosecution, we don't deal with might have happened.
It was, I believe, deemed to be a drug overdose, and she just happened to be the person that was living with him at the time that found him and called it in.
To investigators, one thing seems certain: Deborah's involvement in Tom's murder. And when the requested data from her email account comes in, some deleted entries confirm those suspicions.
Some of the other searches that were found on Deborah-Frazier's phone included how to load a revolver or a gun, what size ammo do you need, what if the ammo is wrong, how to uncock the hammer on a revolver, on a .22, and maybe most importantly, the worst place to get hit, in the head.
To me, it suggested that she had been planning something at least for days, but some of the searches went back as far as a week and a half.
Deborah's account also reveals she was connected to Wi-Fi at the apartment she shared with Tom on the night of his death. For detectives, the only thing missing now is a proverbial smoking gun.
After sending all of our evidence off to the crime lab, we were able to get back the hair that was discovered during the autopsy, both in the Velcro and Tom's hands. and a fingerprint off of the duct tape, and that led back to Deborah-Frazier. And there's only one way that it could have gotten there.
However, the question of how Deborah managed to pull off the murder on her own still remains.
Based upon the evidence where the blood was located and the nature of the entry wound into the head, we believe that she walked up behind him. He is either asleep in the recliner or watching a TV show, and she gets to a very close range and she pulls the trigger, killing him. The Velcro straps were important because you can imagine that what had happened is she had used those as leverage to try to drag his body on her own to the closet. I think it was at the point where she started to move him that it really dawned on her that her plan had a lot of flaws, and she was not going to be able to get him out of that house by herself. And if she couldn't get him out of the house by herself, how was she going to be able to explain it?
That's where she came up with the home invasion.
On September 7th, 2023, Deborah-Frazier is arrested at the hospital.
So after Deborah is medically cleared from the hospital to be released, she's arrested.
Ms. Frazier is charged with aggravated murder, 3 counts of tampering with evidence, and 1 count of abuse of a corpse.
Deborah immediately asks for an attorney, and police and prosecutors know their work isn't done.
We want to be thorough. We want to make sure we have a solid prosecution. You only get one shot at it.
We're still working the case, but in my mind, there's no doubt of her involvement. We just need to keep going. We want to get as much information and enough evidence as we can so it leaves no doubt with anyone that could be in this jury. Her background, from what we dug into, it seemed normal, but ultimately we'd found out in the prior months of this there was a lot of deception going on with Deborah.
She was a consistent manipulator and liar, and she certainly was engaged in some real manipulation related to false allegation of rape.
With Deborah-Frazier awaiting trial for the murder of her boyfriend, Tom Waddell, investigators spend the next several months shoring up the case for prosecutors. As they dig deeper into Deborah's life, they find a long history of lies and manipulation.
We went and talked to her dad at one point, and he had basically explained that because of her, there were allegations brought on he and his late wife.
We'd found the call where she had alleged some abuse on her parents that was unfounded. So they really didn't have a good relationship.
As the investigation was progressing, we were contacted by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and they had been investigating a rape allegation that she made that happened at Dillon State Park.
She stated that a man came up to her and tried to pull her pants off and used a knife to threaten her with it. She has a mark on her that was superficial, but it was not a substantial injury.
They had found out a number that she claimed to be a witness was actually a fake number that she created that came back to her Gmail account.
Don't know that I've ever dealt with a person who was so dishonest and so manipulative with so many people over such a long period of time.
It was just amazing how far that she had got in this fantasy world that she was living in.
Prosecutors theorized that Tom's discovery Deborah was draining his bank account led to his death.
I ultimately think what caused Deborah to snap was that another world of lies was collapsing around her. She had Mr. Anderson as a boyfriend. She had Mr. Waddell as a boyfriend. They didn't know about each other, but she was using Mr. Waddell's resources to live. And those resources had slowly been drained off. When that was discovered, she was going to be exposed as being a fraud, and she couldn't have that happen.
I also think that there was kind of a heartbreak story behind it. We found in the living room a bunch of torn up pictures of Tom and Deborah. Whether it was Tom, whether it was Deborah, I'm not real sure, but there was some kind of lost love, heartache there.
Every conclusion that we've made about her motives are conclusions that we drew from the evidence at the scene and all the collected data, but it's never been actually explained by Deborah herself.
In March 2024, Deborah-Frazier decides to plead guilty instead of facing a jury.
They read the details of everything. It was gruesome and it was wrong and it was foul. And it angers me just sitting here and talking to you about it now. Like, he didn't deserve that. No one deserves that.
She is sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 23 years.
I would have liked to seen life, no parole, but at the end of the day, she's behind bars and she can't hurt anybody. I try to honor my father's memory by teaching my kids and raising my kids the way he taught me. Do unto others as you want them to do to you. Try to solve problems by talking. Be laid back, have fun. Just be a good person.
One of the last messages my dad sent to me, he was telling me how proud that he was of me for being the mom that I was to the boys that I have. My boys loved him so much, so this hit them hard too. So I talk about him when I can, but it's still really fresh, so it's still really hard.
Human beings are strange creatures. They commit atrocity for reasons so trivial, so pathetic, that they defy the very concept of sanity. I have spent my life staring into the abyss of the human heart, and I tell you, most of what you find in there is darkness. Sometimes that darkness wears a friendly face. Sometimes it sits right across from you at a diner, drinking coffee, acting as if it is not the very thing that keeps parents awake at night, clutching rosaries and praying for a miracle that will never come. My, you look at a man like David Meyerhofer, and you think you see a face, but you do not. You see a hollow shell, a predator playing a game of chess with the lives of children. And he thought he was the smartest person in the room. He was not. The tragedy of the Yeager family is a scar on the soul of Montana. It began in the quiet of a summer night in 1973. 12-year-old Heidi Yeager wakes up to a breeze in a tent, a sensation that has no business existing in the sealed sanctuary of family camp. She reaches out, the dark swallowing her hope, and finds only the cold bite of the mountain air. Her sister Susie is gone. Just like that. A whole slice of the fabric of their lives, and suddenly the world is a different, more terrifying place. I have worked scenes like this. The panic is not a sound. It is a weight. It is a sound of Mother, Marietta, staring at a black sky and begging the universe to show some mercy, to bring the sun, to bring her child back. She finds a stuffed animal in the wet grass, abandoned, a silent witness to a crime that should have been impossible. You have to be kidding me. A child disappears from a tent, and the local authorities are scrambling, grasping at straws, while a shadow moves through the trees. The investigation was a masterclass in frustration. The FBI was in its infancy with this thing they called criminal profiling. Back then, most cops thought it was science fiction, some kind of academic parlor trick. But when you are dealing with a predator, you have to think like one. They were looking for a monster, but they were looking in the wrong places, bogged down by the arrogance of believing that a man who kills can be identified by a simple polygraph test. David Meyerhofer walked through those interviews like a ghost. He was a helpful neighbor, the former scout, the man who asks questions, the man who offers to help search, the man who points you toward a piece of clothing to lead you away from his own sins. It is a classic move. Keep the police close, keep the information closer, and stay invisible in plain sight. The phone calls were the most chilling part of the entire affair. This man, this creature, was not just stealing a child. He was torturing a family. He played with their hope, calling them, dangling the prospect of Susie's return like a carrot before a donkey, knowing full well he had already snuffed out that light. He taunted them, demanded ransom, and forced them to live in a state of suspended animation. My. The cruelty of a man who records a phone call and thinks he is the master of time and space. When the FBI finally decided to use their heads and listen to those profilers, the walls began to close in. They found the receipts, the blood, the list, that pathetic, organized list of future victims. It is the hallmark of a sick mind that craves order in its chaos. He treated the lives of little girls like items on a grocery list. The end, when it came, was as cowardly as the life he had led. They found the remains of Sandy Dickman and the tragic, burned fragments of little Susie Yeager. He had hidden them away like trash, discarded in the dark corners of a ranch that had seen too much sorrow. When the truth finally spilled out, it was not a revelation of hidden genius. It was a testament to the banality of evil. He confessed to killing Susie, to killing Sandy, and then he started bragging about other kills, Michael Rainey, Bernie Pullman. He wanted to be remembered. He wanted to be a legend, but he was just a butcher. When he took his own life in that cell, he was not escaping justice. He was just closing the book on a story that should never have been written. I tell you, there is no redemption for a man like that. There is only the long, cold silence that follows the truth, and the enduring strength of a mother like Marietta who, in the face of such absolute hate, chose to reach for the impossible, forgiveness. It does not fix what was broken, but it is the only thing that keeps the rest of us from losing our own minds. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for reasons so mundane, so trivial, that it makes you wonder if we are all just one bad day away from the abyss. I have spent a lifetime looking into the eyes of people who have discarded the most sacred thing we possess, life, and every time it shakes me to my core. You see, murder is not always a chaotic explosion of rage. Sometimes it is a result of a slow, rotting obsession, a quiet descent into a madness that nobody notices until the smell of decay fills the air. I tell you, it is absolutely unbelievable. Take the case of Shirley Pierce, a woman who was a ray of sunshine in Kannapolis. She was kind. She was professional. She was the kind of person who gave more than she took. She had finally found a man she wanted to spend her golden years with, a man named Chuck Reeves. They had plans. They had a future. But someone else, a woman named Marlene Johnson, had decided that Shirley's future was a threat to her own fragile, twisted reality. Marlene was a woman of means, someone who walked through life expecting the world to bend her ego. When she became convinced that her husband was having an affair with Shirley, a delusion that had no basis in reality, she didn't just get angry, she became a hunter. I have seen jealousy before. It is a poison. It eats away at your capacity for reason until everyone you look at is an enemy. Marlene hired investigators. She used technology to track a woman who was simply going to work and living her life. It was a mission. She woke up every day and asked herself, what can I do to destroy her? Think about that. That is not just jealousy. That is a malignancy of the soul. On that Tuesday morning, the mask fell off. Marlene entered that home, and the resulting violence was not just an attack. It was an exorcism of her own insecurity, performed with a blade. She tried to scrub the evidence away with bleach, trying to erase the physical manifestation of her crime. But she forgot one thing. Secrets always have a way of surfacing, even if they are covered in chemicals. When we look at the other side of the ledger, we see the tragic story of Barbara and Debbie Burns. This was not a crime of jealousy, but a crime of exhaustion. Imagine, if you will, a young woman whose life ends at the age of 15 because she is suddenly tasked with the full-time care of a sibling with profound disabilities. 40 years, for decades of being a nurse, a mother, a breadwinner, and a punching bag, Barbara gave everything she had until there was nothing left but shell. When the inheritance money finally ran out, the fantasy of a better life crumbled and the pressure cooker finally blew. She shot her sister in her sleep, then lived with the body for weeks, trying to hide the truth with air fresheners and open windows. It is haunting. She killed the person she had dedicated her life to, not out of malice, but out of a complete and total breakdown of the human spirit. She snapped. She became a monster in her own home, and when the detectives finally caught up to her, she barely remembered the act. It is as if her mind had performed its own mercy killing to spare her the horror of what she had done. You have to be kidding me, right? No, this is the reality of our world. We like to think we are in control, but sometimes the weight of a life becomes too heavy to carry, and the result is a tragedy that echoes through time. People ask me why I stay in this business, why I keep looking into the dark corners. It is because I am still looking for the answer to why we do these things. I am still searching for the logic and the madness, even though I know, deep down, that sometimes there is no logic. There is only the aftermath, the broken lives, and the silence that follows. It is a heavy burden, but someone has to tell their stories, because if we stop paying attention, the darkness just keeps spreading. It is simply heartbreaking. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for the most trivial reasons imaginable, and they do it with a cold, calculated indifference that would freeze the marrow in your bones. I have seen the worst of us, and I tell you, it never gets any easier to look into the eyes of a parent who has lost their child to the darkness. You look at these cases, and you have to wonder if there is any shred of humanity left in the world. Let's talk about Prescott, Arizona, a place where the pines grow tall and the mountains scrape the sky. But even in such beauty, the shadow of evil can fall. On the evening of September 29th, 1988, a man was out finishing a day of target practice. He walks toward his truck, thinking of dinner, of his bed, of a normal life. Instead, he finds a nightmare. He sees a pile of debris, garbage bags, and something protruding, a limb. He realizes, with a horror that stays with you forever, that he is looking at a human body, burned, defiled, beyond recognition. The victim was 19-year-old Pamela Pitts, a bright, vibrant girl with a future that was snuffed out before it could even begin. You see, murder is not just about the act. It is about the theft of everything that person was going to be. Pam was outgoing, a mentor, a big sister who took others under her wing. She moved in with a woman named Shelley Norgard, a girl who seemed to drift through life with a trail of abandonment and emptiness in her wake. You have to be kidding me. You invite someone into your home to share your life, and they turn it into a tomb. The investigation was a mess from the start. We did not have the DNA tools then that we have now. We were flying blind in the dark. The coroner could not even determine the cause of death because the fire had been so vicious, so thorough. It was an act of pure, unadulterated hatred. People in town whisper about satanic cults and ritualized killings. But those are just stories people tell themselves to make sense of something that makes no sense. The truth is far more mundane and far more terrifying. It was just a roommate with a grudge. Shelley Norgard was a master of the narrative. She had theories on how to dispose of a body, burning them or dropping them into mine shafts. Think about that. Who talks about that? Only someone who has already rehearsed the act in the theater of their own mind. She had a motive, money, resentment, the simple fact that Pam was moving on and leaving her behind. But she was clever, or so she thought. She had alibis. She had stories. She had a way of looking the other way. Then, 3 years later, in 1991, another body is found in a vertical mine shaft. A young man named Ray Clerks. He was Shelley's boyfriend. He was planning on leaving her, and in her world, you do not leave Shelley Norgard. If you try to exit her life, she makes sure you never leave it at all. He was found wrapped in a waterbed liner, shot in the head. It was the same pattern, the same cold disposal of a human life. When we found the fingerprint on a flashlight inside that mine shaft, the game was up, she confessed to the murder of Ray, claiming it was an accident. A story I have heard 1,000 times from killers who want to keep their hands clean of the blood they spilled. But what about Pam? We knew, we all knew, but we had no evidence, no smoking gun, just a hollow silence that lasted 23 long years. It takes a certain kind of patience to wait for a monster to trip over their own tongue. In 2017, I finally listened to the old phone calls, 97 of them, and there it was, a conversation with her father where the line goes dead. That silence, that is the sound of guilt. That is the sound of a secret that has finally run out of room to hide. When we finally arrested her for the murder of Pam Pitts, I looked at her, and she had that look, defiant resignation. She knew she had lived with it for 30 years, thinking she had gotten away with it. She eventually pleaded guilty, giving us a version of the story where she just could not stop hitting her. A fight? Over nothing? A girl's life ended because of a petty argument? That is the banality of evil. She served her time. She walked free, and she continues to exist in this world. And that is the hardest part for families. They have to live with the memory, while the person who destroyed it gets to keep breathing. Justice is not a neat, clean thing. It is jagged and incomplete, and most of the time, it leaves you feeling empty. But at least now we know the truth. And in the world of homicide, the truth is the only currency that matters. Describing him as a gentle and kind soul. Investigators and family members believe the true motive was financial. Without a will, Lana stood to inherit Steve's entire estate. Before she could be arrested, Lana attempted to take her own life, but survived. In January 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a food or drug product, receiving a sentence of 25 years in prison. The murder of Steve Clayton was a calculated act of betrayal that was only uncovered thanks to his family's persistence, preventing what might have otherwise been dismissed as a tragic natural death. Here is the seamless narrative of the case in English. The story begins with Steve Clayton, a successful, generous, and gregarious businessman who was deeply loved by his family and friends. After years of searching for a partner who could match his zest for life, he met Lana Walsh, a quiet nurse 12 years his junior. Despite their opposing personalities, the two married in 2013 and eventually settled into a picturesque dream home on the banks of Lake Wylie, South Carolina. It seemed like the perfect future for the couple until tragedy struck in July 2018. Steve, then 52, died suddenly at home. Lana claimed he had been suffering from vertigo and collapsed, and initially, it appeared to be a natural death. However, Steve's family grew deeply suspicious due to Lana's erratic and cold behavior immediately following his death. She rushed to have his body cremated, began clearing out his personal belongings within days, and claimed he had left no will, a detail that made no sense given Steve's background as a meticulous financier. When the family investigated the master bedroom, they were horrified to find a mattress soaked in urine, indicating that Steve had been incapacitated and suffering for days, completely contradicting Lana's story. Driven by these red flags, the family demanded an autopsy and a toxicology report. The results were chilling. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops like Visine. When ingested, this substance is a potent poison that can cause nausea, dizziness, and eventually cardiac arrest by shutting down the central nervous system. Under interrogation, Lana eventually confessed to the crime, admitting she had systematically poisoned Steve by putting the eye drops into his water and food, while she attempted to justify her actions by claiming Steve was abusive, a claim vehemently denied by everyone who knew him. The scientific evidence proved a methodical, slow-motion murder. As a nurse, Lana used her professional knowledge to ensure Steve remained sick, isolated, and unable to seek help until she finally delivered a lethal dose. Lana Clayton eventually pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food and drug items, receiving a sentence of 25 years in prison. The case stands as a haunting reminder how easily a facade of domestic happiness can hide a calculated and sinister betrayal. Would you like me to elaborate on the specific forensic evidence used to secure her conviction? Or are you interested in learning about other similar criminal cases? The tragedy of Steve Clayton, a betrayal of trust. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and devoted businessman who dedicated his life to mentoring young entrepreneurs and cherishing his family. After retiring at 41, he spent his years giving back to others and acting as a father figure to his siblings. In 2013, he married Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior, believing he had finally found a soulmate. To the outside world, their marriage appeared to be a picture of happiness and deep affection. However, the dream turned into a nightmare in July 2018. After a brief period where Steve complained of vertigo, dizziness, and nausea, he was found dead at the base of a staircase in his South Carolina home. Lana claimed he had suffered a natural heart attack, an explanation initially accepted by authorities. Suspicion, however, quickly took root within Steve's family. They were devastated to discover the master bedroom mattress was soaked in human waste, suggesting Steve had been suffering an agonizing, immobile silence for days, neglected by the very person who should have been caring for him. Furthermore, Lana's cold, rushed actions, disposing of all of Steve's personal belongings, claiming there was no will, and attempting to cremate him immediately, deepened their alarm. They insisted on an autopsy. The toxicology report revealed the shocking truth. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops. While harmless when used to the eyes, THZ is a potent poison when ingested. It attacks the central nervous system, restricts blood supply to vital organs, and induces a slow, agonizing death. When confronted by investigators, Lana confessed to poisoning Steve's water with the eye drops. While Lana attempted to justify her actions by claiming Steve was verbally and physically abusive, his friends and family vehemently denied these allegations, describing him as a gentle and kind soul. Investigators and prosecutors concluded that the murder was premeditated and motivated by greed. Because Steve lacked a will, his entire fortune would have automatically transferred to Lana. Upon learning that she was to be arrested, Lana attempted to take her own life, but survived. In 2020, she accepted a plea deal for voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food products. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The case remains a haunting reminder of a man who was stolen from those who loved him, taken by the very person he trusted most, after a calculated and methodical betrayal. Here is the seamless, continuous narrative of the story in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous businessman and the heart of his family. After building a national physical therapy company, he retired at 41 to devote his life to mentoring young entrepreneurs and cherishing his loved ones. In 2009, he met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. Despite their clashing personalities, Steve being boisterous and gregarious, while Lana was quiet and reserved, the couple married in 2013 and moved into a picturesque lakefront home in South Carolina to build their future together. The tragedy began in June 2018 when Steve suddenly fell ill with symptoms of dizziness and nausea, which Lana dismissed as vertigo. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of the staircase in their home. Initially, authorities suspected natural causes, such as a heart attack, but Steve's family became suspicious due to several red flags. Lana was eager to cremate his remains. She began disposing of his belongings immediately, and she claimed the meticulous businessman had left no will. Most damning was the state of their master bedroom, where the family discovered a mattress soaked in human waste, proving that Steve had been incapacitated and neglected for days. Driven by these suspicions, the family demanded a toxicology report. The results were shocking. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in common eye drops. While tasteless and odorless, the substance is deadly in large quantities, as it restricts blood supply to vital organs and causes a slow, agonizing death. When confronted by detectives, Lana initially attempted to portray Steve as an abusive husband to justify her actions, but she eventually confessed to poisoning him. Although Lana claimed she only intended to make Steve sick as revenge for alleged abuse, the scientific evidence proved it calculated, prolonged poisoning that left Steve physically unable to call for help. Prosecutors and family members concluded that the murder was motivated by greed, as Lana stood to inherit Steve's entire fortune in the absence of a will. After a failed suicide attempt, Lana Clayton was arrested and later pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a food product. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison, leaving behind the memory of a beloved man who was cruelly betrayed and murdered by the person he trusted most. Here is the seamless narrative of the tragic case of Steve Clayton in English. Steve Clayton was a highly successful, generous, and devoted family man who retired early from his finance career to focus on mentoring others and cherishing his loved ones. In 2013, he married Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior, believing he had finally found his soulmate. However, in June 2018, Steve began suffering from mysterious, debilitating bouts of dizziness, nausea, and extreme exhaustion. His wife, Lana, insisted these were merely episodes of vertigo and took charge of his care at their home. The tragedy reached its breaking point on July 21st, 2018, when Steve was found dead at the bottom of a staircase in their South Carolina home. Initially, authorities attributed his death to a natural heart attack. However, Steve's family became deeply suspicious due to several red flags. Lana was in a rush to cremate his body. She immediately began disposing of all his personal belongings, and she claimed he had left no will, an act entirely uncharacteristic of a man known for being meticulous and organized. Prompted by the family's concerns, investigators ordered an autopsy and a toxicology report. The results were chilling. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops like Visine. While odorless and tasteless, THZ is highly toxic when ingested, capable of shutting down the central nervous system and inducing fatal cardiac arrest. Faced with the evidence, Lana Clayton eventually confessed to poisoning her husband, while she attempted to justify her actions by claiming she was retaliating against alleged verbal and physical abuse. Friends and family vehemently denied these claims, describing Steve as a gentle, kind soul. Evidence showed that Steve had been methodically poisoned over several days, suffering a state of severe neglect while his wife, a trained nurse, failed to seek any medical help. Following a failed suicide attempt, Lana was arrested and charged. In 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a food product and was sentenced to 25 years in prison, bringing a grim conclusion to a calculated and cold-blooded betrayal. Here is a story written in a seamless, continuous narrative in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and vibrant businessman who, after retiring early at age 41, dedicated his life to mentoring others and cherishing his close-knit family. His life seemed to reach a perfect chapter when he met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. The two married in 2013 and eventually moved into a picturesque lakefront home in South Carolina. To those around them, Lana appeared to be a quiet, sweet, and supportive wife who brought a newfound sense of peace to Steve's life. However, the facade began to crumble in June 2018 when Steve suddenly fell ill. Suffering from unexplained dizziness, vertigo, and nausea, Lana, leveraging her background as a nurse, insisted that Steve was simply exhausted and suffering from chronic vertigo, assuring his family that she was providing him with the best care. This illusion of normalcy was shattered on July 21st, 2018, when Lana called 911 to report that she had found Steve dead at the bottom of their staircase. With no immediate signs of a struggle, local authorities initially suspected a natural death, possibly a heart attack. Steve's family, however, was struck by a profound sense of unease. Their suspicions deepened when they discovered a urine-soaked mattress in the master bedroom, which stood in stark contradiction to Steve's meticulous nature and suggested he had been incapacitated and neglected for days. Furthermore, Lana's frantic haste to cremate Steve's body and her claim that he had left no will, an impossibility for a man of his financial sophistication, raised immediate red flags. Pressed by the family's insistence, the medical examiner performed a toxicology report, which revealed the shocking truth. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline THZ, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops. When confronted by detectives, Lana Clayton eventually confessed to poisoning her husband. She claimed that she had laced his drinks with eye drops, ostensibly to get back at him for alleged verbal abuse. But the evidence painted a much more sinister picture. As a nurse, Lana knew the devastating effects of the substance. Prosecutors argued that she had methodically poisoned him over several days, leaving him weak and unable to call for help while trapped in a house without a landline. Though she attempted to take her own life upon learning of her impending arrest, she survived and was brought to justice. In 2020, Lana Clayton pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food and drugs, receiving a 25-year prison sentence for a calculated, slow-moving murder motivated primarily by the desire to inherit Steve's wealth. Steve Clayton's life, filled with laughter and kindness, was ultimately stolen by the person he trusted most. Here is a continuous narrative of the case in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous businessman known for his boisterous personality and deep devotion to his family. After retiring at 41, he dedicated his life to mentoring others and acting as a pillar for his loved ones, particularly his younger sister, Rosie. In 2013, he married Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. Despite their clashing personalities, Steve being gregarious and Lana being quiet, the couple appeared to share a happy life in their picturesque lakefront home in South Carolina. The tragedy began in June 2018 when Steve suddenly fell ill with symptoms of vertigo, nausea, and disorientation. Lana, relying on her medical background as a nurse, insisted that Steve was simply suffering from exhaustion and vertigo, providing care for him at home. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of their staircase. Lana claimed he had suffered a dizzy spell and fallen, and because there were no obvious signs of a struggle, investigators initially suspected a natural death, such as a heart attack. However, Steve's family grew deeply suspicious. They were troubled by Lana's behavior. She moved quickly to cremate Steve, donated his personal belongings to charity almost immediately, and claimed he had died without a will, which contradicted his reputation as a meticulous, organized accountant. The turning point came when family members discovered a mattress in the master bedroom soaked with human waste, suggesting Steve had been incapacitated and neglected for days. At the family's insistence, a coroner performed an autopsy and a toxicology screen. The results were shocking. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline THZ, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops. Under police interrogation, Lana eventually confessed. She admitted to poisoning Steve's water with eye drops, claiming she only wanted to retaliate against him for alleged verbal and physical abuse. While she attempted to smear Steve's character, his friends and family adamantly denied these claims, asserting that he was a gentle and kind soul. Prosecutors argued that Lana had systematically poisoned Steve over several days, leaving him to suffer in agony without medical intervention, ultimately motivated by the financial gain of inheriting his estate. After a failed suicide attempt, Lana Clayton was arrested and ultimately pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food products. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison, bringing an end to the life of a man whose trust was betrayed by the person who had vowed to care for him. Is there any other aspect of this case or any other topic you would like me to summarize for you? Here is the seamless, continuous narrative of Steve Clayton's story in English. Steve Clayton was a highly successful, generous, and gregarious businessman who, after retiring at the age of 41, dedicated his life to mentoring others and supporting his close-knit family. Known for his larger-than-life personality and unwavering devotion to his loved ones, Steve believed he had found his soulmate in Lana Walsh, a nurse he married in 2013. The couple eventually settled into a picturesque lakefront home in South Carolina, where life appeared idyllic until June 2018. Without warning, Steve began suffering from mysterious, debilitating bouts of vertigo, nausea, and extreme exhaustion. On July 21, 2018, Steve was found dead at the base of the staircase in his home. His widow, Lana, insisted he succumbed to a natural accident related to his ongoing health issues, and initial investigations appeared to support this. However, Steve's family became deeply suspicious due to a series of disturbing red flags. They discovered a heavily soiled mattress in the master bedroom, which stood in stark contradiction to Steve's reputation as a meticulous clean freak. Furthermore, Lana's behavior in the immediate aftermath, rushing to dispose of Steve's belongings, claiming he had no will, and making hurried funeral arrangements, seemed entirely inconsistent with the behavior of a grieving spouse. Driven by the family's insistence, authorities conducted a toxicology report that ultimately shattered Lana's narrative. The results revealed lethal concentrations of tetrahydrozoline, THC, the primary active ingredient, in over-the-counter eye drops in Steve's bloodstream. When confronted with the evidence, Lana confessed to poisoning Steve's water with the substance, while she attempted to justify the act as retaliation for alleged verbal and physical abuse. Investigators and family members vehemently rejected these claims, characterizing Steve as a gentle soul. Authorities concluded that Lana, utilizing her medical knowledge as a nurse, had methodically poisoned Steve over several days, fully aware of the lethal consequences. Following a failed suicide attempt upon learning of the impending investigation, Lana was arrested and charged. In January 2020, she entered a plea of guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a drug or food product. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The case remains a chilling reminder of how a calculated betrayal, driven by the motive of financial gain, could destroy the life of a man who was the heart and soul of his family. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and lively businessman known for his booming personality and deep devotion to his family. After years of searching for a partner who matched his intellectual and emotional depth, he met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years a junior, in late 2009. Although Lana was quiet and reserved, a stark contrast to Steve's vibrant energy, he fell head over heels, viewing her as the missing piece of his life. The couple married in November 2013 and eventually settled into a picturesque lakefront home in South Carolina, where they enjoyed a seemingly happy life, surrounded by family and their beloved dogs. However, their idyllic life took a dark turn in June 2018, when Steve suddenly fell ill with mysterious, recurring bouts of dizziness, nausea, and vertigo. After a brief period of apparent recovery, tragedy struck on July 21, 2018, when Steve was found dead at the bottom of his staircase. Initial investigation suggested a natural death caused by a heart attack, But the Clayton family grew deeply suspicious. They were troubled by the lack of a will, Lana's rapid disposal of Steve's personal belongings, and a harrowing discovery that their master mattress was soaked with human waste, suggesting Steve had been bettered and neglected for days before he died. Urged by the family to look deeper, authorities conducted a toxicology report which revealed lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, in Steve's system, the active ingredient found in over-the-counter eye drops. While harmless in eyes, the substance is deadly when ingested, causing central nervous system failure. Facing the evidence, Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Steve's water with the eye drops over several days. While she claimed the act was an impulsive response to alleged verbal and physical abuse, friends and family vehemently denied these claims, describing Steve as a gentle, loving soul. Investigators concluded the motive was financial gain, as Steve's lack of will ensured his entire estate would pass to her. After a failed suicide attempt as police closed in, Lana Clayton was arrested and ultimately sentenced to 25 years in prison in 2020 for voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food and drug items, ending the life of a man who had trusted her with everything. Would you like to know more about the specific legal arguments used during the sentencing? Or perhaps more about the forensic details of how the investigators linked the eye drops to the cause of death? Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and vibrant businessman who deeply loved his family and friends. After retiring at 41, he dedicated his life to mentoring others and enjoying his close-knit circle. In 2013, he married Lana Walsh, a nurse he met in North Carolina. While Lana appeared to be a quiet and sweet partner, their marriage took a dark turn behind closed doors. In June 2018, Steve suddenly fell ill with symptoms of vertigo, dizziness, and extreme nausea. His wife, Lana, told family members that he was merely exhausted and needed bed rest. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of the staircase in their South Carolina lakefront home. Initially, law enforcement suspected a natural death, such as a heart attack, based on Lana's account and the lack of visible trauma. However, Steve's family became immediately suspicious. They were troubled by the state of the master bedroom, where they found a urine-soaked mattress, indicating that Steve had been neglected and incapacitated for days, as well as Lana's haste in disposing of his personal belongings and her claim that he had no will. The family's persistence led to an autopsy and a toxicology report, which uncovered the horrifying truth. Steve had been methodically poisoned with tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in common eye drops like Visine. Ingesting large amounts of this substance shuts down the central nervous system and leads to cardiac arrest. Confronted with the evidence, Lana admitted to investigators that she had been putting eye drops into Steve's drinks. While she claimed it was a result of alleged verbal and physical abuse, those who knew Steve, a man remembered as a gentle and kind soul, rejected her claims as a desperate attempt to manipulate the narrative. Evidence indicated that she had been poisoning him over several days and ultimately administered a fatal dose. Following a failed suicide attempt, Lana Clayton was arrested and charged with murder. In 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a food or drug product. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. For Steve's family, the tragedy remains a deep wound. They lost a man they described as a hero and a mentor, a life stolen through a cold and calculated betrayal. Here is the seamless narrative of the Steve Clayton case in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and boisterous businessman who dedicated his life to mentoring others and supporting his close-knit family. After retiring at 41, he eventually found love with a nurse named Lana Walsh. The couple married in 2013 and moved into a picturesque home on the banks of Lake Wylie in South Carolina, where they appear to be living an idyllic life. However, the facade began to crumble in June 2018, when Steve suddenly fell ill with mysterious bouts of dizziness and nausea. Lana, utilizing her background as a nurse, cared for him at home, claiming he was suffering from vertigo. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of the staircase in their home because there were no signs of a struggle. Lana convinced authorities that his death was a natural consequence of his illness, likely a heart attack. Suspicion quickly mounted within Steve's family. They were baffled by Lana's behavior. She immediately began clearing out Steve's belongings, cremated him against his wishes, and insisted that he had left no will, an act completely out of character for a man as meticulous as Steve. Furthermore, when family members visited the home, they discovered a mattress in the master bedroom soaked in human waste, suggesting Steve had been incapacitated and neglected for days. Driven by their intuition that something sinister had occurred, the family pushed for a toxicology screening. The results were shocking. Steve's blood contained a lethal concentration of tetrahydrozoline, THC, the active ingredient in common eye drops. Under police interrogation, Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Steve by secretly spiking his water with eye drops, while she attempted to justify the act as revenge for alleged verbal and physical abuse. Investigators and the family refuted her claims, noting that Steve was a gentle soul. It became clear that this was not a spur-of-the-moment act. Lana had methodically poisoned him over the course of 3 days, while he was too weak to seek help. Her true motive was financial. Without a will, she stood to inherit his entire fortune. In a final attempt to evade justice, Lana attempted to take her own life by turning on the gas in her home before her scheduled arrest. She survived, was treated, and was promptly taken into custody. In January 2020, Lana Clayton pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food products. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison, bringing an end to the calculated betrayal of a man who had loved her deeply. Here is the story, written as a seamless narrative. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and charismatic businessman who retired early at 41 to dedicate his life to mentoring others and supporting his family. In 2009, he met Lana Walsh, a quiet nurse 12 years his junior. Despite their opposing personalities, Steve being boisterous and outgoing, and Lana being a wallflower, Steve became deeply enamored, eventually marrying her in 2013. The couple settled into a beautiful lakefront forever home in South Carolina, where they seemed to be living an idyllic life. However, the dream turned into a nightmare in June 2018 when Steve suddenly fell ill with mysterious bouts of vertigo, nausea, and dizziness. Lana, acting as his primary caregiver, attributed his failing health to exhaustion and his pre-existing medical issues. On July 21st, 2018, tragedy struck when Lana reported finding Steve dead at the bottom of their staircase, with Lana claiming he had collapsed due to his vertigo. Initial responders believed he had suffered a natural heart attack. Steve's family, however, was deeply suspicious. When they arrived at the home, they were shocked to find a mattress heavily soiled with human waste, indicating that Steve had been incapacitated and neglected for days. Furthermore, they found it highly uncharacteristic that the meticulous Steve had no will, and they were alarmed by how quickly Lana began disposing of his personal belongings and arranging for his immediate cremation. Driven by their intuition that something sinister had occurred, the family successfully demanded an autopsy and toxicology testing. The results were chilling. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THC, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops. While colorless and tasteless, high doses of THC are deadly, causing a systemic shutdown of the central nervous system. When confronted, Lana initially claimed Steve had been abusive, attempting to paint herself as a victim. She eventually confessed to putting Visine in his water, feigning that she only wanted to cause him diarrhea as revenge for his alleged behavior. Investigators, however, determined that she had been poisoning him systematically over several days, leaving him to suffer alone. After a failed suicide attempt, Lana was arrested and charged. In January 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food items. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. While Lana insisted she never intended to kill Steve, Prosecutors and the family maintained that the murder was a cold-blooded, premeditated act driven by financial greed, as Lana stood to inherit Steve's entire fortune in the absence of a will. Ultimately, a man known for his big heart and life of the party personality was stolen from his loved ones by the very person he trusted most. Here is the seamless narrative of the Steve Clayton case in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and boisterous businessman who served as the backbone of his family. After his father passed away, he stepped into the role of a father figure for his siblings, known for his kindness, humor, and willingness to mentor young entrepreneurs. After retiring at 41, he sought a partner who matched his intellectual and spiritual energy. He eventually met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. In 2013, the couple married and settled into a picturesque, custom-decorated home on the banks of Lake Wylie, South Carolina, where they appear to be living a blissful life. The tragedy began in June 2018, when Steve suddenly fell ill with recurring symptoms of vertigo, dizziness, and nausea. Lana, leveraging her status as a nurse, insisted that he simply needed bed rest and discouraged him from seeking outside medical attention. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of a staircase in their home. Initially, authorities ruled the death natural, suspecting a heart attack based on physical observations. However, Steve's family, particularly his sister Rosie, immediately sensed foul play. They were suspicious of Lana's behavior. She quickly arranged for his cremation, began liquidating his personal belongings, and claimed Steve had no will, a baffling detail for a man as financially meticulous as he was. When family members visited the home, they discovered the master mattress was heavily stained with human waste, indicating that Steve had been incapacitated, neglected, and suffering for days before his death. Driven by the family's insistence, the medical examiner performed a toxicology screen, which revealed a shocking truth. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline THZ, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops. When confronted, Lana confessed to poisoning Steve by repeatedly putting eye drops into his water. She attempted to justify the act as revenge for alleged verbal abuse, a claim vehemently denied by Steve's family and friends. Prosecutors and investigators concluded that the murder was a calculated, cold-blooded act driven by financial greed. Since Steve had no will, Lana stood to inherit his entire estate upon his death. Following a failed suicide attempt, Lana Clayton was arrested and ultimately pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food or drug products in 2020. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Steve Clayton's life was tragically stolen by a calculated betrayal, leaving his family to grapple with the loss of a man who had dedicated his life to helping others. Here is the seamless narrative summary of the story in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and vibrant businessman who retired early at 41 to focus on mentoring others and supporting his family. In 2013, he married Lana Walsh, a nurse who seemed to be the perfect, quiet, and sweet partner he had been searching for. The couple moved into a beautiful lakefront home in South Carolina, where life appeared idyllic for several years. In June 2018, however, Steve suddenly fell ill with debilitating dizziness, nausea, and vertigo. Lana, acting as his primary caregiver, claimed he was simply exhausted and suffering from chronic issues. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of his staircase. Initially, local authorities suspected a natural death, such as a heart attack, as there were no signs of physical struggle at the scene. Steve's family, however, was deeply suspicious. They were troubled by Lana's hasty disposal of Steve's personal belongings, her claim that he had left no will, contrary to his meticulous nature, and the disturbing state of the master bedroom, which showed signs of severe neglect. At the family's insistence, a toxicology screening was performed, revealing a shocking truth. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline THZ, the active ingredient in common over-the-counter eye drops. This substance, which is tasteless and odorless, had effectively shut down his central nervous system, leading to his heart failure. When confronted by investigators, Lana confessed to poisoning Steve's water with eye drops over the course of several days. She attempted to justify her actions by alleging that Steve had been verbally and physically abusive, claiming she only wanted to make him sick as an act of revenge and never intended to kill him. Both prosecutors and Steve's family vehemently denied these claims of abuse, characterizing Lana's actions as a cold-blooded, premeditated murder motivated by financial gain. After a failed suicide attempt just before her arrest, Lana Clayton faced justice. In January 2020, she entered a plea deal, pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food or drug products. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The case remains a harrowing reminder of how a calculated predator can hide behind a mask of normalcy, ultimately betraying the person who trusted her most. The story of Steve Clayton is a harrowing tragedy of betrayal and calculated murder at the hands of the person he trusted most. A successful, generous, and vibrant businessman, Steve thought he found his soulmate in Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. After their marriage and a move to a beautiful lakefront home in South Carolina, life seemed idyllic until June 2018, when Steve suddenly fell ill with mysterious symptoms of vertigo and nausea. The tragedy reached its breaking point on July 21st, 2018, when Steve was found dead at the bottom of his staircase. While authorities initially suspected a natural death due to a possible heart attack, Steve's family was deeply suspicious. Their concerns were fueled by the discovery of a urine-soaked mattress, which indicated that Steve had been incapacitated and neglected for days, as well as Lana's suspicious behavior in quickly clearing out his personal belongings and her claim that he had no will. Insisting on a deeper investigation, the family pushed for an autopsy and toxicology report, which revealed the shocking truth. Steve had lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline THC, the active ingredient in common eye drops, in his system. Under interrogation, Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Steve by putting eye drops into his water. While she attempted to justify her actions by claiming she was retaliating against alleged physical and verbal abuse, her defense fell flat. Investigators determined that this was not an impulsive act, but a cold-blooded, methodical poisoning that had occurred over several days, rendering Steve too weak to help himself. Prosecution and family members believed the true motive was financial gain, as the absence of a will meant that Lana would inherit Steve's entire estate. After the crime was exposed, Lana attempted to commit suicide but failed. In 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food and drug items, and she was subsequently sentenced to 25 years in prison. The life of a man known for his kindness and warmth was cruelly stolen by the very person he had invited into his life, leaving behind a legacy of heartbreak for all who knew and loved him. Here is the story written in a seamless narrative flow in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and gregarious businessman who served as the rock and emotional anchor for his family. In 2013, he found what he believed to be his missing piece in Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. The couple eventually settled into a picturesque dream home on the banks of Lake Wylie, South Carolina, surrounded by family and friends. However, their seemingly idyllic life took a sinister turn in June 2018, when Steve suddenly fell mysteriously ill, suffering from debilitating bouts of dizziness, nausea, and vertigo. Despite Lana's assurances that she was caring for him as a nurse, Steve's health continued to decline rapidly. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was discovered dead at the bottom of his staircase. Initial reports from the scene suggested a natural death, potentially a heart attack, as there were no immediate signs of a struggle. However, Steve's family was deeply suspicious. They knew Steve to be a meticulous man who would never have died intestate, yet Lana claimed there was no will. Furthermore, upon inspecting the master bedroom, the family was horrified to discover the mattress heavily soaked in human waste, indicating that Steve had been incapacitated and neglected for days. Driven by these red flags, the family demanded an autopsy and toxicology screening. The results were chilling, Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops like Visine, a substance that is odorless, colorless, and deadly when ingested. When confronted by detectives, Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Steve's water with the eye drops, claiming it was an act of revenge for his alleged verbal and physical abuse. Investigators and those closest to Steve, however, rejected her claims of abuse, describing him instead as a gentle, kind-hearted soul. They concluded that, as a nurse, Lana understood the lethal potential of the substance and had methodically poisoned him over several days to ensure his death. The prosecution maintained that the true motive was greed. Without a will, Lana stood to inherit Steve's entire fortune. After an unsuccessful suicide attempt, Lana was arrested. In 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tamper with a food product, ultimately receiving a 25-year prison sentence. Steve Clayton's life was cut short by a calculated betrayal, and it was only through the relentless persistence of his family that the truth was uncovered, preventing a cold-blooded murderer from evading justice. Would you like me to focus on any specific aspect of this case, such as the forensic evidence or the legal outcome, in more detail? Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and devoted businessman who retired at 41 to focus on mentoring young entrepreneurs and cherishing his family. Known for his larger-than-life personality and boisterous spirit, Steve seemed to have found his missing piece in 2009 when he met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. Despite their personality differences, Steve being gregarious and Lana being a quiet wallflower, they married in November 2013 and eventually settled into a picturesque dream home on the banks of Lake Wylie, South Carolina. The idyllic life they built began to unravel in June 2018 when Steve suddenly fell ill with debilitating dizziness, nausea, and vertigo. Although Lana was a nurse, she claimed he was merely exhausted and insisted on bed rest. Tragically, on July 21, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of their grand staircase. Responding officers and the coroner initially attributed his death to natural causes, specifically a heart attack, as Lana insisted he had been struggling with illness for days. However, Steve's family, particularly his sister Rosie, was deeply suspicious. They found it impossible to believe that a man as meticulous as Steve, a former finance professional, would not have a will. Furthermore, when they visited the home, they discovered the mattress was soaked in human waste, suggesting Steve had been incapacitated and suffering in neglect for days, contradicting Lana's claims that she was providing attentive care. Driven by these inconsistencies, the family demanded an autopsy and a toxicology screening. The results were shocking. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, the active ingredient in common over-the-counter eye drops. THZ is odorless, colorless, and tasteless, making a lethal weapon when ingested, under pressure from investigators. Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Steve by adding the eye drops to his water, while she attempted to justify her actions by claiming Steve was verbally and physically abusive. His friends and family vehemently denied these allegations, noting that Steve was a gentle and kind soul. Investigators concluded that Lana's true motive was financial gain. Without a will, she stood to inherit Steve's entire estate. After a failed suicide attempt as police closed in, Lana was arrested. In January 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a food product. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison, ending the life of a man whose generosity and laughter had left a lasting mark on everyone who knew him, and exposing the calculated cold-bloodedness of a woman who had abused her medical knowledge to commit murder. Here is the seamless narrative version of the story in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and charismatic businessman known for his larger-than-life personality and deep devotion to his family. After years of searching for a partner who could match his intellectual and emotional depth, he met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. Their life together seemed idyllic, especially after they moved into their forever home on the banks of Lake Wylie, South Carolina. where they surrounded themselves with family, friends, and pets. However, in June 2018, the dream began to unravel. Steve suddenly fell ill with debilitating vertigo, nausea, and exhaustion. As a nurse, Lana took charge of his care, keeping him bedded in a home. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of his staircase. Initial assessments by the coroner suggested a natural death, likely a heart attack, given his recent health struggles. Suspicion, however, quickly took hold among Steve's family. They found it impossible to believe that Steve, a meticulous accountant, would have left no will. Their concerns deepened when they discovered the couple's mattress was heavily soiled with human waste, suggesting Steve had been incapacitated and neglected for days. Furthermore, Lana moved with alarming speed to cremate his body and clear out his personal belongings. Prompted by the family's insistence, the medical examiner performed a toxicology screen, which yielded a shocking result. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in common over-the-counter eye drops. When ingested, this substance acts as a potent poison, constricting blood vessels and leading to cardiac arrest. Confronted with the evidence, Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Steve, claiming she had been a victim of his verbal and physical abuse and only intended to make him ill as revenge. However, those who knew Steve, a man remembered as a gentle, men-alike figure, vehemently denied these accusations. Investigators concluded the poisoning was a calculated, methodical act motivated by greed, as Lana stood to inherit Steve's entire estate in the absence of a will. After a failed suicide attempt just before her arrest, Lana Clayton was taken into custody. In 2020, she accepted a plea deal for voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food and drugs. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison, bringing an end to a cold-blooded betrayal that almost passed as a natural tragedy. Would you like to explore more details about the legal proceedings? Or are you interested in the forensic science behind how such a common item like eye drops can be used as a weapon? Here is the seamless, continuous narrative of the case in English. Stephen Clayton was a successful, generous, and big-hearted businessman who served as the backbone of his family. After retiring at 41, he dedicated his time to mentoring young entrepreneurs and cherishing his loved ones. In 2013, he married Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. To all outward appearances, the couple lived an idyllic life in their beautiful lakefront home in South Carolina, filled with affection and family gatherings. However, in July 2018, Stephen's life came to a tragic and suspicious end. The nightmare began when Stephen suddenly fell ill with debilitating dizziness, nausea, and exhaustion. Despite his deteriorating state, Lana, a trained nurse, did not seek medical help, claiming he was simply suffering from vertigo. When police arrived at their home on July 21st, 2018, following a 911 call, they found Stephen dead at the bottom of a staircase. Lana insisted it was a tragic accident, and initially, the coroner attributed his death to natural causes, possibly a heart attack, as there were no outward signs of a struggle. However, Stephen's family became deeply suspicious. They discovered the mattress in the master bedroom was soaked with human waste, indicating that Stephen had been lying helpless and incapacitated for days without proper care. Furthermore, Lana's bizarre behavior, such as disposing of Stephen's personal belongings immediately and claiming he had left no will, despite his known meticulous nature, raised major red flags. Driven by their intuition, the family successfully insisted on an autopsy and toxicology screening. The results were shocking. Stephen's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, the active ingredient found in over-the-counter eye drops. Faced with the forensic evidence, Lana eventually confessed to poisoning Stephen's water with the eye drops, while she claimed she only intended to make him ill as revenge for alleged verbal and physical abuse, a claim his family vehemently denies. Investigators concluded that the motive was cold-blooded financial gain. Without a will, Stephen's substantial estate would have legally defaulted to Lana upon his death. After an unsuccessful suicide attempt, when she learned police were closing in, Lana was arrested. In 2020, she pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a food product and was sentenced to 25 years in prison, ending the story of how a trusted spouse became a calculated killer. Here is a story of Steve Clayton written in a seamless, cohesive narrative. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous businessman, known to his family and friends as a vibrant, boisterous, and deeply loving man. After retiring at 41, he dedicated his life to mentoring young entrepreneurs and cherishing his close-knit family. In 2013, he married Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior, whom he believed was his soulmate. The couple moved to a beautiful lakefront home in South Carolina, where life appeared idyllic. However, in June 2018, Steve suddenly began suffering from mysterious bouts of dizziness, nausea, and vertigo. As a nurse, Lana took charge of his care, but his condition deteriorated rapidly. On July 21, 2018, Steve was discovered dead at the bottom of his staircase. Initially, authorities and the coroner suspected a natural death, possibly a heart attack or an accident caused by his vertigo. However, Steve's sister Rosie and other family members were deeply suspicious. They were disturbed by the condition of Steve's bedroom, specifically a mattress soaked with human waste, which was entirely inconsistent with Steve's meticulous nature. Driven by the gut feeling that something sinister had occurred, the family demanded a full autopsy and toxicology report. The results were shocking. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in common over-the-counter eye drops. When ingested, the substance shuts down the central nervous system and can cause fatal cardiac events. Facing the evidence, Lana eventually confessed to detectives that she had been poisoning Steve by secretly putting eye drops into his water. She attempted to justify her actions by claiming that Steve was verbally and physically abusive, painting herself as a victim seeking revenge. However, Steve's friends and family vehemently rejected her claims, describing him as a gentle soul and labeling her accusations as a calculated attempt to smear his character and avoid a harsher sentence. Prosecutors argued that Lana, using her medical knowledge, had methodically poisoned Steve over several days, leaving him incapacitated and unable to seek help. After a failed suicide attempt, Lana was taken into custody. In January 2020, she accepted a plea deal, admitting to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food products. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. While the motive was widely believed to be financial gain, as Steve's lache would have left his entire estate to her, the true legacy of the case remains the senseless theft of a beloved man's life, leaving his family to grapple with the betrayal of someone they had once welcomed into their hearts. Here is the story of Stephen Clayton written as a seamless narrative in English. The story of Stephen Clayton is a chilling tragedy of betrayal and a testament to the power of a family's intuition. Steve was a successful, generous businessman who retired at 41. Known for his boisterous personality, his role as a father figure to his siblings, and his unwavering love for his family. After years of searching for a partner who matched his intellect and spirit, he met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. Despite their contrasting personalities, Steve being gregarious and Lana being quiet and reserved, the couple fell in love, married in 2013, and eventually settled into a beautiful, postcard-perfect home on the banks of Lake Wylie in South Carolina. The tragedy began in June 2018, when Steve suddenly fell ill with debilitating vertigo, nausea, and dizziness. Lana, acting as his primary caregiver, tended to him at home, telling worried family members that he was simply exhausted. On July 21, 2018, the nightmare culminated when Steve was found dead at the bottom of their staircase. Lana claimed that his vertigo had caused him to fall and die of natural causes. In the immediate aftermath, she acted with suspicious haste. She arranged for a cremation, claimed he had no will, and began clearing out his personal belongings, including his clothes and jewelry, even before his memorial service had concluded. Steve's family, however, knew him as a meticulous, health-conscious man who was never without his phone and was essentially a clean freak. The inconsistencies in Lana's story and her cold behavior led the family to suspect foul play. Refusing to accept the coroner's initial suggestion of a heart attack, they demanded an autopsy and a toxicology report. The results were shocking. Steve's system contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops like Visine. Faced with the forensic evidence, Lana eventually confessed to detectives that she had been poisoning Steve's water with eye drops because she was angry, though she maintained that she never intended for him to die. Investigator, however, uncovered a much darker reality. Steve had been systematically poisoned over several days, leaving him too weak to call for help while trapped in a home that had become a scene of filth and neglect. Prosecutors argued the motive was clear: financial gain. With no will, Lana stood to inherit everything. In 2020, Lana Clayton pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a food product, receiving a 25-year prison sentence. Ultimately, it was the persistence of Steve's family that uncovered the truth, ensuring that what could have been a perfect crime instead became pursuit of justice for a life stolen by a calculated betrayal. The story of Steve Clayton is a tragic account of betrayal and a cold-blooded murder hidden behind facade of a happy marriage. Steve was a successful, generous, and boisterous businessman who deeply loved his family and was known for his gregarious personality. In 2013, he married Lana Walsh, a quiet, unassuming nurse whom he believed to be his perfect match. However, the couple's move to a lakefront home in South Carolina marked the beginning of a sinister end. In July 2018, Steve was found dead at the bottom of his staircase. Initially, Lana claimed he had suffered from vertigo and died of a natural heart attack, a story that authorities were initially inclined to believe given the lack of signs of a struggle. Suspicion, however, quickly mounted among Steve's family members. They discovered that the mattress in the master bedroom was soaked with human waste, which was entirely inconsistent with the behavior of a man as meticulous as Steve. Furthermore, within days of his death, Lana began liquidating Steve's assets and personal belongings, and she claimed that he had died without a will, a scenario that defied logic for a man of his financial background. Driven by these red flags, the family demanded an autopsy and toxicology screening, which ultimately exposed the truth. Steve had been poisoned with lethal doses of tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in common eye drops. As a nurse, Lana possessed medical knowledge to understand that ingesting large quantities of eye drops would cause nausea, dizziness, and eventually total failure of the central nervous system. When confronted, Lana confessed to poisoning Steve's water, alleging that he was abusive and that she was merely seeking revenge. This claim was vehemently rejected by those who knew Steve, who described him as a gentle and kind soul. Investigators concluded that rather than a crime of passion, this was a calculated act of murder motivated by financial gain. In January 2020, Lana Clayton pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Steve Clayton was a man who lived his life to help others, yet his life was stolen from him by the very person who had vowed to care for him. Here is the story written as a continuous narrative in English. Steve Clayton was a successful, generous, and vibrant businessman who was widely adored by his family and friends. After retiring early at age 41, he dedicated his life to mentoring young entrepreneurs and cherishing his loved ones. In 2009, his life changed when he met Lana Walsh, a nurse 12 years his junior. Despite their starkly different personalities, Steve being boisterous and outgoing, and Lana appearing quiet and reserved, Steve believed he had found his soulmate. The couple married in 2013 and eventually moved into a beautiful, picturesque lakefront home in South Carolina. The tragedy began in June 2018, when Steve suddenly fell ill with symptoms of vertigo, nausea, and dizziness. Lana, leveraging her professional background as a nurse, insisted that Steve was simply exhausted and required bed rest, effectively isolating him. On July 21st, 2018, Steve was discovered dead at the bottom of the staircase in their home. While authorities initially suspected a natural death from a heart attack, Steve's family was deeply suspicious from the start. They were horrified to find the couple's mattress soaked in human waste, a condition completely inconsistent with Steve's notoriously clean and meticulous nature. Furthermore, Lana's behavior, immediately disposing of Steve's belongings and claiming there was no will, raised further red flags. Driven by the family's insistence, investigators ordered an autopsy and toxicology report. The results were shocking. Steve's blood contained lethal levels of tetrahydrozoline, THZ, the active ingredient in over-the-counter eye drops like Visine. THZ is colorless, odorless, and tasteless, making it a lethal weapon when ingested in large quantities. Confronted with the evidence, Lana initially attempted to smear Steve's character by alleging he was abusive, but she eventually confessed to poisoning his water with the eye drops. She had even attempted suicide shortly before her arrest. In January 2020, Lana Clayton pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and tampering with food and drug products. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Steve's family and prosecutors maintained that her claims of abuse were a fabrication intended to justify a cold-blooded murder motivated by financial gain. Steve Clayton's life was tragically cut short by the person he trusted most, leaving behind a legacy of generosity and warmth that continues to be remembered by all who knew him. This is a story of a man whose life was defined by the warmth he brought to others, a story that begins not with an ending, but with a vibrant, booming greeting. Hello, hello, hello. That was the signature rhythm of Steve Clayton, a man whose presence was as large as his heart. He was a successful and generous businessman, a person who had spent his life building up those around him. Along his journey, he met a nurse who possessed a heart that seemed, at first glance, to be as grand as his own. She struck everyone as being very quiet, but very sweet and very nice. It was not long before Steve fell head over heels. He could not hide the feelings he had for her. He was very much in love with her. But as the pages of time turned and a sickness consumed their marriage, those who loved them simply knew that there was something very wrong. Money, success, and status are no protection against the currents of fate. This is not a natural death, but rather a story of a life extinguished too soon, and the journey to uncover the truth behind it. Welcome. Tonight we celebrate the joining of two wonderful people. It is March 10th, 2007 in Miami. It is a big day for the bride, Rosemary Clayton, and her family. She is finally marrying her love, William Leslie. That is the oldest brother of the bride, 52-year-old Steve Clayton, proudly walking her down the aisle. 11 months prior to the wedding, they had lost their father. Rosemary asked her brother if he would step in. Of course, there were a lot of tears. She could not imagine anybody else standing in place for her father. Who gives this woman to be married to this man? I do in the memory of my father. It was sentimental to be gathered at something so special, where their father was not present. With their father passing, the brother of Rosemary, Steve, was now the head of the family, and though he had never had children of his own, he had always been a father figure to his siblings. When the father and mother of Steve were married, Steve was just about 2 or 3 years old. He had 4 sisters, and Rosemary was the youngest. He was 10 years older than her. So there really was not a moment when Steve was not in the life of his sister. Steve was her big brother, and he was her hero. He was everything a little girl would want in a big brother. He played football, he wrestled in high school, and so that really made him bigger than life for her. After high school, Steve graduated college with a degree in finance and quickly matured into a shrewd businessman. Steve, with a partner, started a company called Physical Therapy Resources. That eventually became a national company with physical therapy centers all over the country. Steve and Rosemary met at work. He was in a hospital, and she was in the same hospital, and that is how they met and became friends. He was very successful and eventually sold his interest in his business. And basically from that point on, he was retired. His goal was to retire at the age of 40. He missed it by 1 year. He retired when he was 41. Selling his business freed up Steve to do whatever he wanted. And what he wanted to do was give back. He would mentor such a large group of young men, helping them start up a business, or helping them find out what direction they wanted their life to go. Steve was extremely generous with not only his resources, but with his time. And Steve always had time for his family. Rosemary filmed as Steve teased their Uncle Max. It is special. Their dad was not so funny. He was more serious. Serious, much more serious. He was always serious. But where did that money come from? Steve? I do not know. And when his sister Rosemary got married, it was a good humor of Steve that made him the life and soul of the occasion. Please get up, Steve. Plate. Steve was always the first guy to get up to give a toast anywhere. Hello, hello, hello. It was always ad-lib for him, from the heart. This is my way of, getting away from the emotional stuff. William, thank you so much. I am not going to look at you. Thank you so much for making my sister so happy. And my dad. Steve was never one to hide his emotions. My dad told me before he passed to take care of my sister, to honor you. And he loved you very much. I have to get serious here. All right, I am cool. All right, you guys are great companions. You are great partners. And my sister, I have never seen her happier. After the speeches, Steve stepped up for the father-daughter dance. He came up, and they got ready to dance. And before the music started, they had a very, very powerful moment. A surprise recording of their dearly departed father played out. The best moment of my day was when you were climbing my knee. You would say, "Daddy, I love you." I miss those days, I really do, because I love you too. He had so many duties that day. He was a father figure. He was the best man. He was the entertainment. He was the one that kept everyone calm, kept everyone laughing. He was a natural at it. Despite his success and close network of family and friends, the own romantic life of Steve had been rocky. He looked for a partner that was as focused and determined and loving and caring as he was. And that is a tall order to fill. Now 52, his family figure would take a very special person to sweep him off his feet. I think Steve was always looking for somebody on a level he could connect with emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. But 3 years later, that is exactly what happened. In late 2009, Steve decided to leave his home state of Florida for a change of pace in North Carolina. He really loved being physical. He loved walking. He loved anything to do with being outdoors. So when he moved from South Florida to North Carolina, he had the opportunity to be outdoors a lot more. Within just a few months, Steve announced that he had met someone special. He seemed to have a glow that he had been missing for a little while, and he was excited. Her name was Lana Walsh, 12 years his junior. She was a nurse who grew up in Oklahoma. She struck the family as being very sweet, very quiet, but very sweet. And this quiet kind of stood out because Steve was not very quiet. The personality of Steve was gigantic. She was more like a wallflower. Despite their differences, Steve was sure she was the one. They were very affectionate with each other, always arm in arm. Steve was always hugging her, squeezing her, kissing her. I felt happy for my brother. So, of course, anybody that he loved, I was going to embrace. It was not long before Steve asked Lana to move in with him. After they got to know each other quite a bit more, Steve persuaded her to come to Charlotte. And, Steve could be very convincing, and they added some new additions to the family. The first dog that Steve and Lana got was Guinness, an Italian greyhound. They loved the breed, and so they decided that they wanted another one, and her name was Sadie. With Lana, Steve finally felt he had found his missing piece. Steve always had great things to say about her. He referred to her as his Lana Sue. He could not hide the feelings he had for her. He was very much in love with her. I think Steve found himself well grounded with Lana. I felt like Steve found a certain sense of peace with her. Steve Clayton came to North Carolina for a change from his old life and found a whole new future. When Steve Clayton danced with his sister at her wedding, he dreamed of finding his own special someone, and now, 6 years later, he was about to marry the love of his life, a Veterans Affairs nurse named Lana Walsh. It was a lovely day in November 2013. Many of the family had traveled to North Carolina just to be there and enjoy that day with him, and he made it very special for everyone. The wedding of Lana and Steve took place at their house in Charlotte. It was such a beautiful event. You could just see the love. Just beaming both of them were. Soon after, the couple decided to relocate and move into their forever home, just over the border in South Carolina, on the banks of Lake Wylie. It was like something on a postcard. This gorgeous ocean blue home, sitting on a gorgeous piece of lakefront property. It was very lovely. The couple set about refurbishing their new home, decorating it with a collection of artworks and antiques that Steve possessed. Steve was the kind of person for whom objects were very personal, and he was very proud of his possessions. They were all unique in some way. The move allowed the couple to indulge in their love of nature. So, if there was something fun and outdoorsy to do, he was going to be the first one there, and he was gung-ho about it. Their relocation to South Carolina also meant the pair were closer to the extended family of Steve. I married the niece of Steve in 2010, so I officially became his nephew. We hung out with Steve and Lana a lot when they moved up here. We would go out to dinner with them. We would go to concerts. We would go to special events every holiday. They were also just a 30-minute drive from the son and grandchildren of Lana, and the pair never said no to a bit of babysitting. Steve had a way with children, because Steve had always been a child at heart. So he was the kind of guy that got down on the floor and played with the kids. Pop goes the weasel. And with the kids around, there was never a dull moment in the Clayton household. Here, Lana filmed Steve attempting to describe the limbo while her twin granddaughters watched. We will make Papa do it. So there's a stick, and I have to go like that, and I have to go under the stick, and I have to get real low to get under the stick. It is a game. It is a dance. These are dances. You have to tell me how to act it out. Lana was tickled, but the twins were more interested in their ice cream. Steve enjoyed playing all kinds of games, whether it was Scrabble or even a silly child's game. You want to get in, do you not? You do you not? Just spin the spinner, and then turn the handles many times. 2, and put your head in the thing. Put your chin on the thing. Okay, A, E, D, F, spin it forward. Both of them, or one, both of them. Steve was a huge teddy bear. They loved to play with him. He always had kids hanging on him. What number did you get? 3. And Lana was always game for some fun, too. Oh, no, it is coming. It is coming up. It does it every time. Here it comes. Here it comes. Cheers. 5 years into their marriage, Steve and Lana appear to be thriving. But in June 2018, Steve suddenly fell ill. He said he felt dizzy, complaining of vertigo. He said that his ear hurt and that he felt nauseous, and he started getting sick in the yard. And I felt real bad for him. I knew that he had had issues with vertigo prior to this. He said he had been very ill and did not know exactly what was wrong. He just remembered that he was working out in the garden, and he started to feel dizzy, a little nauseous, a little dizzy, headache, and he thought that maybe he had gotten sunstroke. You okay? Yeah. As a nurse, Lana thought the best thing for Steve was bed rest. He said he remembered laying down, and he said the next time he opened his eyes, 36 hours had passed. Worried, Rosemary called Lana to see if she could explain the mystery illness of Steve. I asked her what she thought was going on, because that is very odd for any person of any age to lose 36 hours of time. And she said that he was fine and that she was watching him, and she was making sure he was okay. Though he had never been ill like this before, Lana thought that Steve was just exhausted. I felt reassured that Lana was there to take care of him in any way that she could, especially with her knowledge as a nurse. It seemed the larger-than-life energy of Steve was starting to catch up with him. But just 2 weeks later, it appeared the treatment of Lana had worked. Steve was back to his old self, throwing a party for the 4th of July. That party was just as great as every other party they had been to there. Steve was his normal, affectionate self. Everybody had a great time. Here is Steve dancing with Lana as they celebrate in style. He grabbed Lana right away, and we just kind of followed suit and all joined in. I remember watching them hug and him kiss her, and they were completely in love. Things were good at the Clayton home, and no one doubted that the lives of Lana and Steve were going to be happy and long. On July 21st, 2018, a call came into the York County 911. Police units arrived on the scene, and body camera footage recorded by the responding officer, Sergeant Day, captured what they found. As they walked into the front door, there was Steve right at the bottom of this grand staircase. And unfortunately, at that point, he was gone. He was dead. You could hear him kind of whispering and talking in low voices. That was because Lana Clayton was just around the corner, distraught and crying. So they did not want to say anything that was disturbing to her. So she said she left the next day. Did not put anything, just his wife and family. Sergeant Day needed to talk with the wife of Steve, Lana, to find out what had happened. Ma'am, I am Sergeant Day. I am going to be here for just a little while until the coroner gets here and transporting those things. Oh no, ma'am. I am just fine. It feels good to me to stand if I am not making you uncomfortable. Lana told Sergeant Day that Steve had been suffering dizziness for 2 days. Stephen had been very ill with vertigo. She had found him Thursday morning, that he stood up, got very dizzy and collapsed, that she had to help him upstairs, and since that time he had not been back downstairs. Miss Clayton, you were outside. You were working outside? I was mowing the lawn real quick, and when I came in, I fell down. I am so sorry. I tried to take a blanket underneath me, but I could not. Despite her training, Lana was unable to render aid to Steve. That is when she, I think, really panicked because she knew she could not do anything further to help him. And so she immediately ran out when she heard the motorcycle coming by to wave someone down to call 911. The nephew, Nick French, was on duty as a police officer when he got the news. My mom called and she said, Uncle Steve died, and, just kind of disbelief. I mean, I knew it was for real, but, it did not really sink in, so I got down there as quick as I could. I just remember the whole time going through my head was, how? Why? The phone rang, and I saw that it was my nephew calling. He said, Uncle Steve died. Uncle Steve died. That was not possible. It was not possible. How could he be gone? No, I cannot believe it. With Rosemary 700 miles away, Nick and his family rallied around Lana. I felt awful because I knew she loved Uncle Steve, and I just kept thinking, I am upset right now, but I cannot imagine what she is going through. To find her husband, on the ground like this. Lana feared the vertigo of Steve could have caused a fall.